or belts to prevent the valve parts from being broken or cracked. When fixing, it is better to bundle containers together and tie up both the bottom and upper parts. When using flammable gas, install a backfire prevention device between the gas container and the connection pipe. And a lab handling flammable gas shall be equipped with a gas alarm device for initial response to leakage, and calibration should be performed at each calibration cycle by pressing the button. Ensure that the gas leakage alarm is operating normally in case there is a flammable gas leak. High-pressure gas containers that are stored or have been used shall be closed with a protective cap to prevent damage to the valve part in case they fall down. Glass apparatus, beaker, and experimental tools are kept at the bottom to prevent falling. Items used in the lab that may cause damage to the body if they fall, or could cause a fire or explosion due to shock, should not be stacked on the lab bench or reagent shelf. Be careful, because they may bump the body or stab on the skin. Do not load them on upper part in the lab. Chemical substances, especially reagent-filled glass apparatus, should be stored on a shelf lower than eye height installed with a safety guard. If a safety guard is not installed, use a tray with height to prevent the product, material, and submaterial from falling or breaking or spilling. Securely fix experimental equipment on a base with vibration isolation construction. Attach the safety devices specified in the Industrial Safety and Health Act to dangerous machinery used in the lab. Keep them in available status at all times. Place as far as possible from flammable substances and high-temperature experimental equipment. Do not store unused hazardous substances or waste reagent inside the laboratory. Store less than 1/5 of the specified quantity in a safety cabinet, etc. Hazardous materials above the specified quantity need to be stored separately and distributed. And special chemicals such as ether and phosphorus are stored in cold area. Reagents on the reagent shelf that have not been used for a long time should be discarded and stored with a stopper to prevent them from reacting with external light, heat, or air. Do not store in the lab, as the reagent bottle may explode after long periods of time due to residual chemicals in the reagent bottle. Different kinds of chemicals, reagents, and hazardous materials should not be mixed and should be kept separately depending on the characteristics of each substance as stipulated by the Industrial Safety and Health Act and the Fire Service Act. How to handle waste and waste containers. Waste liquids should be classified and stored in a waste liquid container, and the waste liquid container should be stored enclosed to prevent leakage of waste liquid. Based on the Enforcement Decree of the Dangerous Goods Safety Management Act, hazardous goods and specified quantity, it is not permitted to store hazardous materials exceeding a specified quantity in a building. For flammable substances in the lab, only the daily used volume of the flammable substance must be kept in an approved safety container, such as a separate storage cabinet, or keep it in the hazardous warehouse where ventilation and explosion-proof structures are installed. No unattended load shall be left at a lab entrance used for emergency evacuation. In other words, a lab with 2 or more doors shall remain permanently open for two-way evacuation in the event of a disaster and shall not have fire near the door, etc. Furthermore, do not leave combustibles near any heater. Emergency backpacks are placed in each building. Installing an emergency stock box in the freight elevator can maximize the survival rate in the event people are trapped. It is also necessary to prepare an emergency backpack for emergencies. How to prepare an emergency backpack? Include helmet, magnifier, flashlight, portable medical supply, light stick, chemical disposal bag, mask, dust mask, goggles, anti-chemical protective clothing, insulation shoes, anti-chemical glove, safety vest, disposable raincoat, whistle, etc. You need to know how to receive an earthquake alert. Search and install the Safety Reminder app provided by the Ministry of Public Administration and Security. First, search for Safety Reminder app on your smartphone and install it. You can get earthquake information if you choose Accept Disaster Message or turn on Alert Notification Message. Also, identify the earthquake evacuation location sites. Identify the evacuation site closest to where you live. Let's go over the phenomena produced in an earthquake by grade level. The grade level expresses the degree of shaking experience by a human being or an object or structure experiences depending on the strength of an earthquake. Level 1 is only recorded by the earthquake meter and not felt. Level 2 produces slight shaking of a hanging object. Level 3 is the same as a truck passing by. And Level 4 shakes the house's dishes and windows. Level 5 can break dishes and windows, and Level 6 can move heavy furniture. At Level 7, a person driving can feel the earthquake movement. Level 8 can collapse columns and walls. Level 9 has the potential for damage in all buildings, while Level 10 severely cracks the ground. Level 11, you can see the wave on the surface. Let's go over the actions to take when an earthquake happens, while it is shaking, when it stops shaking, when leaving the building, outside the building, at the shelter, at lab entrance. If you are in the lab during the earthquake, hide under a workbench to protect your body and hold the table leg tight. The earthquake will only last 1 to 2 minutes at most. When it starts to shake, lower your body immediately. Hide under the table. If there is not enough room under the table, cover your head with a cushion. If you feel earthquake during an experiment, immediately close the cap of the reagent bottle. When the shaking stops, store experimental toxic chemicals in the reagent storage box and the fume hood. The gas valves must be shut down to prevent secondary damage. In case the door does not open due to a slight twist, locate an exit to evacuate and carry your cell phone when you evacuate to allow emergency contact. When leaving the building, use the stairs and do not use an elevator. At this time, protect your head with your belongings, such as a bag or a book, and move quickly. When you go out, you have to evacuate carefully while avoiding broken experimental tools on the floor, such as any glass apparatus, fluorescent lamps, etc. If you're inside the elevator, press button on all floors to get off at the first open floor. Get out of the building and quickly move to the nearest designated shelter from your location without moving around the building. Outside the building, protect your head with bags or books, etc. And beware of items that may fall from a building, and move quickly to a nearby shelter. Evacuate on foot without using vehicles. Then, outside the building, act based on guidance provided by the lab manager and the safety manager, and announcements from a public agency. Never enter a building without the permission of the lab manager or safety manager. At this time, the lab manager and safety manager at the shelter should quickly make emergency contact with the emergency room in case someone has been injured and never return back to the lab without a prior safety inspection. The condition of reagents and gases must be checked before returning to the lab. In particular, laboratories handling chemicals, toxic gases, etc. need to be inspected by the lab manager prior to use. Open windows and front doors to completely remove any residual gas in the building through natural exhaust. In case of chemical leakage during pre-checking, the person in charge of lab checks the reagent toxic information and put on safety protective gear, and remove the sorbent, adsorbent, and adsorption fence, counteractive agent of the emergency kit. In addition, chemicals that react rapidly with leaked drugs are isolated to prevent secondary damage and operate appropriate exhaust facilities. If any toxic gas has released during the preliminary, test check the MSDS information about the released gas, wear the safety protective equipment, and measure the concentration of the released gas using a gas concentration meter. Keep the released gas from explosion. Remove the source of ignition and open the windows and doors for normal restoration to completely remove residual gas from the building through natural ventilation. Post-evacuation treatment. The safety manager should identify personnel and any casualties. If there is an injured person, take emergency measures and contact 119 Safety Center to take follow-up measures. If there is a casualty involving contact with a toxic liquid, wash using an emergency shower for more than 20 minutes and take medical measures after cleaning. If toxic gas is inhaled, move to a location with fresh air. The lab manager will check reagent, gas, machinery, or equipment in the lab and guide the researchers back safely. In case of chemical leakage during a pre-check, lab manager checks the reagent toxic information, wears safety protection gear, and removes the leakage using absorbent fabric, adsorbent, absorbent fence, neutralizing agent, etc. In addition, leaked liquid chemicals that react rapidly are stored and isolated to prevent secondary damage. A suitable exhaust system should be employed. In case of toxic gas leakage during a pre-check, after obtaining information on the MSDS, wear protective gear and measure the concentration of gas leakage. Remove the ignition source to prevent leaking gas from exploding and open windows and front doors to completely remove residual gas. For machinery and appliances, inspect electric systems and facility and restore power supply immediately to a lab that requires a power supply. Start the emergency generator when a power failure occurs. In case of malfunction, ask the facility operation team to carry out the repair work quickly. Check with quiz to make sure you understand the course. Summarize the key points of today's lesson.